Over the last 40 years, China's economic growth has been eclipsing that of the United States, growing at an average rate 4 times faster. China dominates global supply chains, and it holds nearly $1 trillion of U.S. debt.
China is a peer country with the United States today. If we use purchasing power parity, its economy is larger than the U.S. economy. And if anyone believes that they can stop China's steady rise as an economy, it's probably indulging in fantasy.
One thing I have to do is economically take on China, because China has been ripping us off for many years. Somebody had to do it. I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it, so I'm taking on China.
In fact, Donald Trump's predecessors have employed measures to restrict China trade practices.
They're taking our business, they're taking our jobs, they're making our product.
But in 2016, Trump made China a major campaign issue.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
Days before Trump's inauguration in 2017, Xi wanted to make sure the incoming president knew where he stood on trade. He sent a warning from his podium at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
搞保护主义，如同把自己关入黑屋子，看似躲过了风吹雨打，但也隔绝了阳光和空气。打贸易战的结果只能是两败俱伤。
Less than 3 months later, Xi would fly to Mar-a-Lago to test the waters.
President Trump's most important foreign meeting yet, greeting the leader of the country he's previously called our enemy.
Behind the scenes, Trump's advisors were advocating bold new measures.
President Trump understood that we had failed to compete with China. And I think because of his business background.
General H.R. McMaster served as President Trump's national security advisor.
One of the lines that President Trump would use with Xi Jinping periodically is he would say, I don't blame you, I blame us. And so I think that that summit communicated to kind of a shocked Xi Jinping that the Trump administration was determined to compete and to no longer pursue this kind of flawed strategy of cooperation and engagement.
I don't blame China, I blame our leadership. They should have never let that happen.
I wrote a lengthy, maybe a 12-page provisional strategy in a sense, but it really started out by saying how many of our assumptions had been wrong.
Matthew Pottinger was one of the architects of Trump's China strategy.
One of the things that I've learned over the years, first as a reporter and later working on national security on China, is that the more comfortable China gets, the more comfortable that the Chinese Communist Party leaders are, the more aggressive and the grander their ambitions. And I actually think that a more confrontational approach, something more reminiscent of key periods of the Cold War, is what we should be looking to right now as examples. You always want the enemy to be worried about what you might do.
The first line item on the agenda was to clamp down on China's effort to steal intellectual property from Western corporations.
CEOs of our most successful and our largest companies would come to me and say, let me tell you how our company is being victimized by Chinese Communist Party economic aggression. And they would lay out the story of, forced transfer of intellectual property.
In other words, you can't do business here unless you give us your secrets.
Exactly. And then also the false promises of access to the Chinese market. As soon as they rip off your intellectual property and pick a state champion to produce those goods at an artificially low price because of the subsidies, they close you out of their domestic market, and then guess what? They dump that hardware and equipment on the international market and drive you out of business internationally.
The Chinese government repeatedly denied stealing intellectual property, and Xi Jinping ordered his diplomats to tap their, quote, fighting spirit, adopting Trump's more aggressive style of communicating.
应该对自己更有信心，堂堂正正地与各国开展竞争。
They were unleashing what they themselves called wolf warrior diplomacy. And it was pretty objectionable, frankly. They were quite...
John Bolton was another national security advisor under President Trump.
But in a way, I think it was beneficial that they did that. They took the mask off. There's no more concealing what their ambitions were.
60,000 factories in our country, closed, shuttered, gone. 6 million jobs at least, gone.
Trump was exaggerating, but less than a year after welcoming Xi to America, Trump was ready to take off his own mask.
So we've spoken to China, and we're in the midst of a very large negotiation. We'll see where it takes us. But in the meantime, we're sending a Section 301 action. I'll be signing it right here, right now.
He was firing the first shot in a war that had been building and would last for years to come.
This is number one, but this is the first of many.
Trade war worries igniting after the president signed this order to slap tough tariffs on China. Punishment.
He started with a 10% tariff on Chinese aluminum, 30% on solar panels and electric vehicles, 25% on steel, and nearly everything else made in China.
Surprisingly, China's not happy, already threatening retaliation.
美方的行为是典型的贸易霸凌主义，中方必将会做出必要的反制，坚决地维护自身的正当合法权益。
What China did was move its exports to other countries and move its imports from other countries as well. So it shifted the purchase of soybeans, for example, from the U.S. to Brazil. So that wasn't a useful policy.
President Trump has just slapped tariffs on another $200 billion of Chinese exports,
igniting the biggest trade war in economic history.
Trump's trade war would consume the remainder of his presidency.
China is now punching back with an equal amount of tariffs on American exports.
After several tit-for-tat tariff increases, the trade war, which continued into the Biden administration, actually increased the trade deficit.
The trade deficit has skyrocketed to $891 billion, the highest ever.
Cost increases also led to a decline in U.S. manufacturing jobs.
Destroyed the industry in the United States.
Intellectual property theft continued, and the costs imposed by tariffs were simply passed along to consumers of imported products. And now, Trump has promised to impose even higher tariffs once he is back in office. Tariffs were put in place because China's economic policy was hurting U.S. factories and workers.
That's a belief on the part of some people in the U.S., especially by the people of the Trump administration.
The Biden administration has even extended those.
But if you talk in private, many don't agree with such kind of policy. Why? Because it hurts the U.S. economy.
There is the argument
that you have the high inflation. Where do you get it? In part because of these tariffs.